Hey everybody, welcome back to Old World Legends, where we focus on growing the community. I'm your host Mike, and with me as always is Evan.
I think I would be a character if I was on the table. I'd be a character, but I think wizard. What do you think? What kind of character
I
would you
think
be?
you are a character, whether you're on the table or not, sir. I don't know if you'd be a wizard, maybe more of a strategist. I'm not exactly
Oh
sure
God, that
where
makes
you would,
me
would you
that
fit
makes
in.
me. I have to fly a lantern now. Don't never say that again.
Well, I wouldn't fly a lantern. I'd be terrified of heights. But yes, today we are going to be continuing our series, our beginning series, walking people through the core rulebook and the fundamentals of the game. And this time we're going to be diving into characters. That being said, it's a really big section, so we're going to go all the way up to challenges. We're going to stop there, and we'll do a different video segment where we'll deep dive into challenges. But let's walk through the fundamentals of the character section. And honestly, this is one of the most complicated sections in the whole book. It really is. Or a different way of phrasing it is this is probably the section where people make the most mistakes. A combination of both characters are complicated. There's a lot of depth and strategy to them. And honestly, a lot of players get confused about previous editions because a lot changed
Yeah.
in this edition compared to other editions.
Well, if the last time you played was 20 years ago in 6th edition, you might be confused to learn that battle standard bearers can take items other than banners. Like they can equip armor and weapons and use them. And being a BSB is basically just like a aura buff upgrade and changes how many victor points you give up when you die. Other than that, you get to be a regular person. I don't. That is something
There's a
that,
lot of fundamental
yeah,
changes.
fundamental, right?
Yep. So let's dive in.
Okay, so characters. To start with, characters are things that have the character rule. They are not just things that are in that 50% of your points can be spent on X category. So, for example, um, Doomseekers are characters and follow these rules, even though they are not
Mm-hmm.
in the character section.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes your head hurt, yeah, okay. Most people don't deal with
Yeah.
that problem. But yeah, so here's the first thing to know about characters. So they're still units, but they get to have special changes. So first of all, you have stats that are different, right? It tends to be the case that characters have more wounds, essentially
Mm-hmm.
plot armor on them than regular rank and file models. You could say that maybe they stay in the fight longer as opposed to just giving up and being like, I'm hurt, wham, they keep fighting, right? Characters in general, almost every wizard is a character. There are a lot of units out there that can cast spells as bound spells, like the Casket of Souls or the Sisters of the Thorn. But in general, a wizard is a character. The only exception to that I'm thinking of right now is things like the Warpfire Dragon can be a wizard.
Yep.
So that it can be a gray area there. But if you're thinking about wizards, if you're
Yeah.
thinking about big flying monsters, a lot of those tend to be
But
I have a character, right?
But fundamentally, effectively, what is a character if you think about it from the army standpoint? It's the heroes. It's the
Mm-hmm.
heroes of your army. It's that general leading the charge. It's that wizard casting the cool spells. It's that heroic person waving the banner above, your whole or that really clever engineer who's telling how all the war machines how to do their job better. That's really what the character is, right? It's your hero piece, right? And a lot of people love to name their character models, or sometimes they imagine that you are the general, so this is your
Yeah.
representation leading your army upon the battlefield. That's really what they represent. And there've been a lot of changes in things over the editions, but in this particular one, that's kind of the standard norm, right? And for the most part, they are in the character section of the roster. There are some exceptions, as Evan pointed out. Let's not spend too much time in this video talking about the exceptions to the rule, and
Yeah.
let's just walk you through the fundamental basics. Now, in a previous video, we did go through champions and how the champions represent. And again, there is a lot of overlap in terms of the champions do use some of the character rules, but they are not a character in the core fundamental rule set that's represented here. Let's not dive into the exceptions of the rules. Let's just focus on the core character basics first. Let's walk you through how the core rules work, because that's how this entire rule system works. Here's the fundamental core rules that everything follows. And then the army books start
Right.
layering on exceptions to the rules, right? So let's just go through the fundamentals.
And it's funny because the first thing they say is, okay, characters have a command range. This is new. This has not been really been a thing before. And every character has this. The command range is
Mhm.
equal to your leadership characteristic, except for 90% of the time where it matters, which is that you have the general or you have the BSB, in which case it's not your leadership characteristic. You just get to have 12 or 18, depending on whether you're a large target or not.
Yeah, so talking about command range, effectively, It's saying that from this model, this
Yeah.
character model, it's saying there are other special rules that at times might say use the command range of this character model for this. But as Evan's saying, and we'll get to it, 99% of the time, that's only relevant for your general to use his leadership value when making a leadership test, or
Right.
the BSB for rerolls. That's 99% of the time that this will come into play. There are some exceptions. In particular, the most notable one is sometimes for wizards casting a spell, the spell will be within a command radius of that character. The reason why this is confusing is because we start out of the bat saying, hey, you have a command range, use that command range. But then 99% of the time you're actually using, there's override ranges for the general
Yeah.
battle standard
Yeah.
bearer that are better than the command range. So sorry, we're going to start with something that they say, here's the basics, and immediately say it's rarely applicable.
That is very weird, and it will catch people off guard, especially because you
All the
might be
time.
reading this thinking, okay, so if I have an orc boss and he's 6 inches away from a group of goblins, then the goblins can use that orc boss's leadership because he's within their 7-inch command range. No.
No.
So only the general has inspiring presence, which is the ability to use leadership within their command range, which is not 7, not 8, not whatever your leadership is. It's actually just always 12, or if you're on a large target, it's 18. So the command range, if you're playing orcs and goblins, for example, only affects some of the spells in WoW magic that have everyone within command range gets this ability.
So there are a couple of
Right.
those, yeah.
Yeah. It does not. For example, a lot of people might think that so your like Arise or Invocation and the Heck ability is command range. It actually isn't.
Nope.
It's 12 inches.
It's a set range.
If you're playing Vampire Counts, the Mortis Engine's bubble of its +1 to cast ability is command range. So that means if your general is riding a Mortis Engine, you have an 18-inch bubble of +1 to cast. If you're not general, if just a regular old Necro is riding a Mortis Engine, the bubble is 7 inches.
Yep. So I think they had really good intentions. Now, to be fair, I really do like the command range rule fundamentally. I think it's great. I think it clarifies a lot of things. It really fantastic. I think it's just the way they're structured in this edition is the default is not what happens most of the time. It's the exception to the rule is what happens the most of the time. But let's just go through this section by section and start walking you through it because we just threw a lot of information at you real fast. So let's go line by line. So we explain what command range is.
Even though this thing was first,
whatever it is,
think about it less, and we'll come back to it later. To start with, you've got a general, and so your prototypical character is you have a general. So everyone has some general. Your general could be a wizard. But let's just say, hypothetically, like most armies out there, it's probably more of like a melee fighting character. Like, for example,
often
if you're playing dwarves,
character.
It's like the king, he's going to be your general because he has leadership 10. So if you took,
to be fair, why are those characters? Because whoever the general is, you determine your general by look at your army roster. Whoever has the highest leadership must be the general. Often the melee characters have the best leadership higher than a wizard. And if they're tied leadership, you get to choose. Now, Evan, if you had to choose between your squishy little high elf wizard or your high elf noble on a dragon, who's really durable, who are you probably going to choose to be your general?
Well, it actually depends. It depends on several factors because, like you just said,
it depends.
If the character's on a dragon, then my general would be on a large target, and then my bubble of leadership would be 18 inches, which is a very big advantage for having your leadership be so much bigger of a bubble, right? That's generally a very good reason to go, okay, then that's who I want to be my general, someone on a large target. However, you may also be of the mind, okay, I don't want my general to be, for example, a beast lord on a chariot, because actually the beast lord is not going to be ranked up in a unit where he can get warband, his leadership goes up to 10 or whatever. The beast lord is running around by himself on a chariot, so I actually don't want him to be the general. I'd rather my wizard be the general so the wizard can rank up in a unit, pass on that warband and buff of a leadership 10 now in a big bubble, and then the beast lord just runs around by himself, and if he dies, I don't give up an extra 100 victory points. So in basically every case other than Beastman, you pretty much pick the fighty character. Vampire Counts do have an alternative rule to this, Mike, which is that your general has to be a wizard.
Through all the exceptions.
Yeah, so here's another fun exception for you. The general has to be a wizard and it has to be the highest level wizard. So even if you have a necromancer and a vampire count, but the vampire count isn't a wizard, then the necro has to be your general. But
Now,
anyway,
either way, so once you've
yeah,
figured out your wizard,
yeah,
it just said the command range
yeah.
is whatever the leadership value is of that character. Now it's pretty obvious. Oh, I just look at the stat profile. Cool. General, typically your characters will be leadership, often 8, 9. There are some armies that go to 10. 10 is a lot less common in this edition than previous edition.
Mhm.
But it actually says, actually, if it's the general battle standard bearer, it doesn't use their straight leadership, does it?
Yes, and that's actually really interesting because then you get to always have 12 or 18, for example. All these other leadership command range bubbles, like for example, let's say for an Empire engineer, in order to use his reroll ability, it's command range, which would be 7 for him. If you
Yep.
cast a spell to lower his leadership, then his command range shrinks as well because this uses the
Hmm.
modified version of their leadership.
And I love that depth to the rule set. Super cool.
Here's a fun question for you, Mike. If my Empire engineer is within range of my general, and my general uses inspiring presence to raise the empire's engineer's leadership to 10, does that increase his command range to 10?
Does that increase his command range to 10? Equal to their leadership? No, because it's not his leadership. He's using the general's leadership. It's saying his leadership.
Okay.
So no, I would not say it increases his command range
Okay.
radius. And I'm sure plenty of people watching this video would love to debate that with me, but that is not how I would interpret those rules. Because it's saying when you're using the general's leadership, your leadership isn't increased. You are using that character's leadership. So your leadership is still what your leadership was.
Okay, so the general. So everyone has to have a general. So no matter what, every army you're playing has at least one character in it, and that character can
So I
be of
can't build
any.
an army with no general. I can't build an
Yeah,
army with no characters. That's not an option.
yeah. No, it's
No.
not.
So it's not. You can't. You have to take one. You have to have at least one character, and by default, if he's the only one, he's got to be the general. You have to have a character.
Mike, what if my only character I want to take has the loner rule, like a demon slayer?
You're going to be in trouble because if you're the loner, you cannot be the general. So
That's true.
I don't think the rule set here specifies that. Again, this is a good example where the rule set is so deep and so complex that it doesn't have an answer to every single edge case like that. But loners, if you have specifically that special rule, and you cannot be the general if you are the loner. Therefore, I would argue it's an invalid list. If you had one character and it was loner, he can't be the general. So if I took a orc and goblin army and I only a night goblin or goblin war boss or night goblin war boss and put him on a giant cave squig, he now has the loner special rule that can't be my only character because he can't be the general.
Oh, really? The giant cave squid gives you loner. I didn't know that.
He has loner,
Oh.
but he can join squig hoppers is the exception to his loner rule.
Okay, I actually think that we need to do a deep dive on the orcs and goblins because not only is their army list like incredibly long, but I don't know if I've actually read it front to back before because I played against them a lot. But yeah, there's some wild stuff.
Well, it's the best army list. I love. They're super
It's
fun. Anyway,
very diverse, that's for sure. Okay, so you get to select your general from amongst the characters of the highest leadership. So if you are playing High Elves and you brought a Handmaiden of the Everqueen and you brought an Archmage and you brought a regular mage, you got 3 characters who are all leadership 8. No one outranks them, so you pick one of those to be your general. It could be any one of those 3. However, if you bring a noble, even if the noble is your battle standard bearer, you then. So a lot of people for a while were saying, okay, I'm going to take a noble. He's going to be my battle standard bearer, invalidating him from being the general. Therefore, I pick a leadership 8 character to be my general, even though my noble has leadership 9. And then the FAQ says, no, you're being a bad high elf. You're not allowed to do that. And so you can't do that anymore. Which is confusing. So here's how it actually works. If you take a character who is the highest leadership, that character cannot be your BSB because he has to be the general instead. Unless if you take multiple characters that then allow that to fizzle out. Does that make sense?
Yep. Makes sense. So again, and this is they have been working in the FAQ to iron some of these things out. So again, you have to kind of go back and forth. But if you're a newer player, you have to take a character. Whoever has the character with the highest leadership by default, he's the general. No other choice. He can't be anything else. If you want him to be something else, you have to take at least one more character that has the equal leadership value, so that he could be the general. So then you can swap it out. That's basically saying you have to have the general. Like you have an army, got to have a general.
Okay, so the only rule the general gets is inspiring presence, which is a rule where everyone within the general's command range, which is 12 or 18, gets to use his leadership instead of their own, as long as the general's not fleeing. Okay. So in that case, it's saying here, rally your general first, because when you're taking rally test, like say your whole army's fleeing, you roll the rally test for your general, so that if he rallies, you then have the higher leadership for everyone nearby who's also fleeing, who can then use his leadership to rally.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But that's it. That's all he does. He doesn't, make people fight harder, unless if you have some special rule like my will be done or something like that. That's all the general does. The battle standard bearer does not let you
To
reroll
be
every.
fair, let's point out that in previous
He
editions,
used to
being the general did more.
Yeah.
Okay. There were more rules that went along with the general, which is what just trips people up coming to this edition. It is just there's a plus side and one plus side, one downside. The plus side is cool, you can use his leadership characteristic. The downside is if he dies, the enemy gets more victory
another
points.
100 victory points. Yeah.
1 plus, 1 minus. That's it. That's all
Yep.
it does.
Yep. Okay, so the battle standard bearer is first of all, a battle standard. This is a flag. So we have a special character who is carrying around a banner. This, unlike in 6th edition, for example, you do get to actually buy other magical items to, like, give yourself, for example, a word save or heavy armor, or you can buy, a weapon, and you can still use a lance or a shield or a bow or a crossbow while
in
still
previous
wielding
editions,
the
like
banner.
if you were carrying the standard, that's it. You get to wield nothing else. That's not true in this edition.
Yeah.
You could imagine that standard, they kind of, I want a magic item and a shield. Cool. I'm going to take that cool magic standard. I'm going to put it in my backpack and it's going to stick on my back behind me. And I can still do everything I want to do, right? Abstractly, there's no penalty for being the battle standard bearer and carrying that banner anymore.
Yeah.
It is just a positive thing. Again, one positive, one negative. The positive is you get a benefit of the battle standard. Negative is the enemy kills you, captures your battle standard bearer. Oops, that gave them more victory points.
Okay, here's the other things the battle standard does. So first of all, he gives you +1 combat res to any combat he's in, and this is like a unique banner bonus that can stack with having a standard from the regular unit. So you can have a unit that then has a regular standard for 1 combat res, and a battle standard is joined to the unit for an automatic 2. If you then have like the war banner, for example, that's already 3. You have close order, that's 4. So you can stack combat resolution, especially with a battle standard in a unit of like infantry troops with ranks and stuff.
So we went over this before. Can you stack the benefit of multiple banners if you have multiple units with a banner in combat?
No, not from regular banners, but you can stack a banner with a battle standard banner.
With a battle standard banner. Now, one other thing to also mention above. Hey, if you shoot my unit, Evan, boom, you shoot it with a mortar, and you kill technically the model that was carrying the standard of that unit, but I still have 12 more models. Does it matter? What happens?
So in the command group case, other models can pick up the banner, for example, and then it just counts as you still have it.
No difference whatsoever, because the next model just picks up the standard and it's totally irrelevant. But if you kill my battle standard bearer, can another model just pick up the battle standard?
So in that case, no. So the battle standard bearer is essentially a hero who's just a unique character. If, for example, you're playing goblins, for example, and one of your goblin bosses is the battle standard bearer, but you have like 3 other bosses and they're all just sitting there naked with a great weapon and a shield or something,
or whatever. Yep.
Right. The enemy will have to decide who they're attacking, and if they try to kill the battle standard bearer, the other heroes who are identical to him can't pick it up.
They can't pick it up. If that battle standard bearer drops, that banner is down. No one's picking it up. It is down.
Okay, so the hold your ground ability is the other kind of special thing the battle standard bearer does. When the battle standard bearer is not fleeing, friendly units within the command range can re-roll panic or rally tests and re-roll the 2d6 when making a break test. The reason why it's saying this separately is because panic and rally are leadership tests, and then for whatever reason, the break test is kind of broken out as a totally separate thing. The reason for that is because they don't want veteran rule, just means you get to re-roll your break test or whatever. But that's why it has to kind of spell this out as 2 different things.
Yep. And in previous editions, the battle standard bearer would just let you re-roll any test, anytime, as long as you're within range. And in previous editions, almost every army was leadership 10. So effectively, it was incredibly hard to fail any tests anywhere in previous editions. It is much better in this edition. It feels significantly more interesting when you're rolling the dice, that there are still armies with leadership 10, elves and dwarves primarily, but for the most part, very few else. But in terms of, there's a difference now. Like, you want to take the veteran rule that lets you reroll leadership tests, super powerful. But but it doesn't let you reroll break tests from combat. But the battle standard bearer lets you reroll that. In fact, in general, I don't think there's anything else in the game that lets you do that. That's coming to
Oh, you
mind, unless
had to
there's.
say that. You had to
Is there a
say
spell that I'm
those
forgetting
words.
about?
No, there is a 15-point ogre item, extremely common item that
Ogres.
lets you
Okay.
reroll a break test because ogres are so expensive that if you were to buy a BSB in a small game,
Yeah, that's
it would
fair.
be very kind of
So you see, there's always
like
an
so many
exception to every rule.
points.
Besides ogres,
Yeah,
but the point is, re-rolling a break test is incredibly
it's very
rare
good.
to find. The owner ogres is the only one outside of it, so it's very, very powerful thing that only the battle standard bearer gets to do.
Okay, but what if your entire army is immune to psychology and unbreakable because you're undead?
Oh,
Then you
oh,
never take a panic test, you never take a rally
correct,
test, and you never take a break
correct,
test. So then what does the battle
correct.
standard do then?
So you can. We're not going to go into the
I know.
details of that, but in the different army books for undead, they have specific rules saying, "Hey, the normal battle standard bearer rules override those because they're not applicable to an entirely immune to psychology undead army. Override them with these special undead rules, and effectively, it just the amount that you crumble by." But again, let's not deep dive that. But it
Yeah,
will
yeah, yeah.
say in that army book for Tomb Kings and for Vampire Counts how the battle standard bearer is separate for them. So it is different for the undead and pretty much the same for everybody else. Battle standard bearers are very powerful in terms of re-rolling those tests, but they are expensive. They can give up more points. And typically, one of the biggest benefits for a battle standard bearer, actually, besides the break test, is they often can take a magic banner. It will say in your army roster. Normally, units will be restricted to this unit can, if you have if you can take a magic standard, you're
Right.
restricted to 25 points or you're restricted to 50 points. Almost everything in the game is like that. It's basically normal troops versus elite troops. But the battle standard bearer in almost every armory says you can take a magic standard worth up to 100 points. Because effectively he can take the best banners that are in the game. So that's another reason why you might want to consider putting a battle standard bearer in your army, because that awesome 60-point banner or 75-point banner, you pretty much can't take it unless you take a character and make it the battle standard bearer.
Right. Okay, so now we're coming up with okay, so then what troop types are the characters? So on the character sheet, they change troop type quite a lot because characters very often have mount options, and this means that the sheet says, okay, my Empire Captain is an infantry model. However, he has these mount options. If you pick a
Yep.
barded warhorse, he becomes heavy cavalry instead of regular infantry. Now he's heavy cavalry, right?
Yep.
If you pick a
Yep.
griffin, he's now a monster or monstrous creature.
Mm-hmm.
So mounted characters basically take over the unit type of the thing they mounted. So they forgo whatever unit type they started as, and now they are something else.
Yep. Now, is every character by default an infantry on foot?
No. So there are characters that are not that. For example, there's like monstrous infantry characters, like ogre characters. There are
Yep. Or
monster
minotaurs?
characters
Yep.
like the demons. The greater demons of
Demon
chaos are all
Prince?
monstrous. Demon
Oh,
princes
yeah.
are monstrous infantry.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm saying like a
Different.
bloodthirster is a monster as a character.
What about
Yeah.
a Shaggoth?
The dragon ogre Shaggoth is not a character. I
Yeah,
kind of
trick
wish he would
question.
be because I would love to have like a dragon ogre
He
themed
was in
army.
previous editions. He's not in this edition.
Yeah,
So
which means he
again,
can ignore challenges, which is
careful.
kind of cool. But yeah, we'll circle back to that later.
Pros and
But
cons. So that's the main thing is by default, most characters start as infantry on foot and you give them a mount and then they change their type. They're still a character, but their unit type switches to whatever the mount is. But there are characters in pretty much every flavor across, because there's 17 army books, so there's a lot of variety of characters. And you can find everything from monstrous characters to infantry characters to cavalry. Their whole spectrum is representative of types of characters.
right. Okay, so when a character is mounted on like a horse or a demigryph, for example, or a griffin, all of those things basically work the exact same way as if you're cavalry, which means you add the
Mhm.
wounds together. So if a dragon gives you +6 wounds, now instead of 3 wounds, you have 9, which is a huge advantage. You get to use the
Huge.
movement of the mount, which means if the dragon is fly 10, you use that instead of like the elf having movement 5. You don't walk, the dragon flies you around. That seems kind of obvious. They use their separate weapon skill and ballistic skill, strength, initiative, and attacks in combat. But when people attack you, they use the character's weapon skill. This might be a little bit confusing if you have, let's say, an archmage whose weapon skill 4, riding a star dragon whose weapon skill 7. When people attack you, they attack the archmage's weapon skill 4. That's what they're swinging against.
To be fair, if I was swinging at a mage on top of a star dragon, I'd probably rather hit the than the dragon too.
Yeah.
Now, for the most part, typically the person on a mount will be a higher weapon skill than the mount, so it's usually an advantage. But as Evan's pointing out, there are examples such as the wizard on a dragon where it's actually a disadvantage. It's easier to hit the character, so that's an important nuance. Another thing to keep in mind, I do want to keep going through this list. Let's keep going through the rest of this list before we move on.
Okay, so other things that are very, very odd. So this is the hardest one to remember. Is this one probably that use the character's weapon skill? The impact hits and stomps use the strength of the mount. That seems pretty obvious. The character doesn't suddenly stomp people.
Nope.
When you make an armor save, you can either choose the mount or the character's armor value. However, if your character has a magic armor set that gives them some ability, like let's say there's Wood Elf light armor that has a regen 5+. Okay, if I want to use the regen save, I have to use the light armor as well. I cannot use the forest dragon's full plate armor for the armor save roll and then fail it and then use the regen from the light armor. You have to use the armor. Yeah, so you're not allowed to be all sneaky. The other one where this comes up a lot is the Armor of the Ages, or whatever the Tomb King's armor is, where it's light armor.
on the Bone Dragon Armor of the Ages.
Yeah. Right. So if you take, you can choose to take the light armor save from the Tomb King's light armor, Armor of the Ages. However, then you don't get to use the full plate and then get a 3-up by saying, I'm going to use the dragon's full plate plus my shield equals a 3+. You don't get to do that. In fact, you don't get to use the dragon.
Almost everybody gets that wrong. Almost everybody.
So you also, if you can't be a Glade Lord with light armor and shield, and use the full plate of the dragon's armor plus my shield, you're not allowed to do that either. You either use the dragon's 4-up, or you use the character whatever he has. That's it. You pick that, and you pick at that stage. And as soon as you failed the 4-up armor save, you then don't get to take the regen save that you then forwent at that point, right?
Yep.
Okay. When the characters move to... So, the whole thing is all one wound profile, and the whole thing has all of its attacks and damage at all of its output level, even if it has 1 wound left. So, if you have a prince on a dragon, he starts with 9 wounds. If he's on 1 wound left, the whole thing still hits just as hard.
Yep. And so, the split profile that we have in this edition, Evan, was this like this in every other edition before?
Absolutely not. What happened in every other edition was that you did combat as if a character, using all of the character's items and weapons, was standing next to a monster with all the monster's items and weapons, or lack thereof, and then you could just choose who you wanted to attack. And so a dragon might be strength 7 with 7 attacks and toughness 7, but it had no armor, no ward, and no regen or whatever. So if you just rolled high enough to wound it, it just died. And so it was very, very easy to either shoot or fight in combat the monster, because it was not able to be protected by a magic art, like a talisman of protection, for example. Like you couldn't provide a ward save to your mount, and so even if it had 7 wounds at toughness 7, it just still went down very, very fast.
All the time. And so so there are pros and cons with their approach to this edition, but ultimately one of the biggest things they made very clear, the designers, is it was a shame that in previous editions you rarely saw dragons and big beastie monsters on the table because they died so easily and such, which was very true. They did die very easily in previous editions. They maybe overcooked them a little bit in this edition, but that's a different conversation for another day. But the split profile, the way they've approached this, both streamlines it a little bit, still has a lot of the depth, but does make the mounts, we're seeing them a lot more, and it is great to see them on the table, and they are a legitimate threat, which is good. Maybe a little bit too much of a threat, but it's great to see them do that. And again, the character stacking of the protection and the armor back and forth, and is a big component of that. And because in previous editions, you could kill just the mount, and then the rider would stranded then on the foot, so you'd actually have to have a different model, or you could kill the rider and then the mount would be separate. The mount would often roll on a separate monster angry table, do stupid things. So
it get very complicated as well.
So while there is a lot of depth here and complexity here, I do believe this is a significantly better system and much more enjoyable, especially with the combining of the wounds. My only criticism of it is they sometimes can be a little too powerful, especially once you start stacking lots of magic items and suddenly you get this 600 point character. Now it can become feeling a bit oppressive. But if you're not going to that threshold, if you're at that 300, 400 point threshold of character on mount, they actually feel great in this edition.
Yeah, so the ones that work amazing are a high elf noble on a griffin with 5 wounds at toughness 5. That actually makes a lot of sense. The amount of attacks it has is great. The mistake that they made, Mike, was that they kind of kept the stats of a lot of the psycho massive ones the same, even though they were able to add to the character's wounds. So now it's all one big pool, and they were able to now
Yeah.
get the ward save. If they so, and this is another thing, they seem to have done this weird thing where if you have a demigryph, where a regular infantryman who rides a demigryph has 3 wounds, an empire captain with 2 wounds rides a demigryph and gets 1 more for 3.
It's weird.
So my Empire Captain on a demigryph is 200 points, but he has the same number of wounds and the same toughness as a 67-point regular knight who rides one.
But that's also really specific for an
No,
instance where
yeah,
it
but I'm
feels
saying
like
the
the upgrade
small
isn't paying
monsters
itself out.
gave you like 2 less wounds than whatever the monster would be without. A perfect
Yes.
example of that is the High Elf Flamespire Phoenix has 5 wounds when it has no rider whatsoever. But if you put him a noble on the Phoenix, it has 5 wounds. Because the mount
Yep.
gives you 3 plus whatever your character had.
Yep. So it's not
Very
a perfect
weird.
system. And that being said, it there are a lot more benefits to this than what it was before. I
Right.
do strongly believe it plays much better than in previous editions, but there's definitely room for improvement. And so read these rules carefully, understand which profile, what you're using. And again, it's there are some oddities out there. And again, some of the real challenges to the system is when ultimately it feels like I'm taking the mount and it's not giving me the durability or upgrade I thought I should be getting with this mount. Kind of gives you a feel bad. Or I'm taking a character and overloading him and turning him into a Death Star because I put this great armor save and a great ward save and a great regen save. And
Right.
the triple save stacking is when this starts to feel really bad and oppressive too. But they have been doing some things in the updates with the match play guide in particular to try and reduce that by putting points caps on characters relative to the point size of the game you're playing. But anyway,
Right.
we have a lot more characters to go through. Let's not dive too deep into the meta implications, but I did want us to at least touch on it.
Yeah, I just all I'm gonna say is that it's the stats and the points that are wrong. It would they can do all their little working around the edges. The Star Dragon giving you toughness 6 and 6 extra wounds when the Phoenix gives you toughness 5 and 3 extra wounds when they cost
Little
very
imbalanced.
similar number of points makes no sense at all. So that's the part that's wrong. Okay, we're gonna go on now. So here's a one that people seem to get wrong a lot, and the reason for it is because people don't like to read the core rulebook. They like to look at their army rules, and the army rules have Star Dragon plus 6 wounds. Makes perfect sense to me. I understand how this works. I pick a Tyrannic Chariot as a mount. It doesn't say plus 6 wounds. It says it has 4 wounds. And my character's riding it, so how many wounds do I have now? Do I have 3 that my prince has, or do I have 4 because I'm on a chariot?
And the reason
I'm
why it
confused.
says that is because when you can take a chariot by itself.
Right.
So they give you the raw stats for that chariot if you took the chariot by itself. But that dragon, you can't in this edition field that dragon by itself. Actually, monsters without being ridden by a hero, there's very, very few of them in this edition, which
Yeah.
I'm not thrilled about that, but that's a different conversation for another time. So they filled out the monster mount. They didn't say it's raw stats by itself because you cannot field it by itself. So they just said plus whatever because this is what it does when you take it as a mount. And this is where that confusion that Evan's talking about, we keep seeing time and time again with new players.
Yeah, so when you buy a chariot, it works almost exactly the same. You add the wounds of a chariot. In fact, it says right here, you add the wounds of a chariot to your character just as if you do it was buying a monster. So a high elf noble on a Tyrannic Chariot has 6 wounds. A high elf noble on a griffin has 5 wounds. So you can actually sometimes get more wounds on a chariot. That's just good to know. When you take toughness, it doesn't say +1 or +0 or whatever. Instead, the chariot has its own toughness and the character has its toughness, and you pick which one's better. In the high elf case, the chariots always have better toughness of 4 than the character's 3. In the
'Cause you're an elf.
beastman case, the beastman characters always have toughness 5 and the chariots have toughness 4. So generally speaking, the chariots, the character's toughness is actually better. So putting a wargear on a Tuskor chariot is a great way to get a toughness 5 thing with 6 wounds all of a sudden.
Yeah, so you get the benefit of it. So rather than, as we were explaining before, where the weapon skill, nope, you have to just take the rider. This is the case where actually whatever is the more beneficial to you, you get to use the more beneficial thing.
Okay, you get the unit type of chariot. Obviously, you use the weapon skill of the character. For example, it's very similar to the monster. The effect hit and stomps are still the chariot. For example, you have oh yeah, I'm sorry. You get to pick the toughness when they make attacks against you, And the whole model, when it's reduced to 0 wounds, gets removed. When you make an armor save, you pick either the character or the chariot, whichever's better. However, again, and was in the FAQ as well, both chariot mounted characters and monster mounted characters are now capped at a 3+ armor save. So, so for example, if you have a high elf character who is riding on a creation chariot, the creation chariot has a 4+ armor save. So if the high elf character doesn't have a better than 4 up armor save, you use the chariot's armor save. If the high elf character does have better, you can use that one. So, but the best you get is 3+.
And it is worth pointing out that 3+ again, that's a 1.51 FAQ update.
So it's not in
specifically here. They're not correcting something that was clearly a balance change for the game, and they realized, hey, some of the oppressiveness we were talking about, this is one of the tweaks they were doing too. I don't think they fixed the problem, but they definitely improved it, which I'm very grateful that they've done that. So it's saying if you're a character on foot or on a basic mount, you can go up to a 2+ armor save. Go for it. Have fun. But if you're on a chariot or you're on a monster, nope. No matter what you do, no matter how many rules you stack, no matter how many magic items or benefits, you never get better than a 3+ armor save.
Yeah,
and that was a balance change they put into the 1.5.
And it was very unfair that some armies just had, oh, Mike, would you like to spend 10 points to buy, I don't know, a helmet that just gives you +1 to your armor save? Or maybe you would really like to spend some points on pants that are made of troll and they give you +1 armor save. Mike, do you wear pants? Because I like pants. But apparently every other character in the game doesn't have pants.
I wear pants, yes.
Yeah, well, every other character in the game didn't wear pants, but orc characters wore pants.
Well, what can I tell you? We've been over this, Evan. Orcs are the best, and everyone else should just follow what the orcs do.
Right, but it was super, super weird for a while there, where an Empire character, which usually has very good armor saves, could not get a 2+ armor save general on a griffin because they didn't have a random magic item that gave them +1. Yeah. But the orc character could, and it was like, why is that any of the? How any of this works? Okay,
it doesn't matter now.
Yeah, it doesn't. Hopefully, they continue to make those kinds of quality of life. This makes no sense. Improvements.
They've made tons of improvements, and again, as much as we criticize them, we greatly appreciate the design team. They're doing an incredible job for starting out so small in the beta edition, and they are doing a great job continuing to release FAQ updates more so than any other edition game that's ever been supported.
That's true.
Keep up the great work.
The Warhammer Fantasy was,
but it is better than it's ever been.
Yeah, Warhammer Fantasy was like, oh, here's some stuff. We'll see you in 18 months.
In the past. Yeah. So they're doing an awesome job. Not perfect, but they're doing great. Keep it up.
Okay. Characters and formations. So this is where we go into a whole other thing, which is how do characters run around? Now, if you're an infantry or cavalry model, you get to be a skirmisher and you get to be a lone character. That's probably going to be a whole other video because that's just a whole other rule set and way that it works.
Say that one more time because people get confused about this. How does that work again?
Okay, so if you are a character and you're not joined to a unit and your unit type is either infantry or cavalry, you cannot be a monster, you cannot be a chariot, you cannot be a swarm. Okay, no
Good
characters
to know. So only infantry or cavalry. Gotcha.
Yes. And you're not joined to anything, so you're by yourself.
Okay, I'm not in a unit. I'm by myself.
Then you get the rule set lone character. If you are not any of those other things, so for example, as soon as you buy a dragon for your prince, you have now surrendered and you are no longer a lone character. You are a unit of type monster, and that's what you run around as. You are not I'm going to skirmish, I'm going to hang out. Now, the big controversy or kind of competitive balance whack-a-mole is lone characters can be cavalry and monstrous cavalry counts. So if you have a lone duke on a royal Pegasus, he gets to fly and have skirmish because he is a lone character. Even though he has like 6 wounds. 5. Which is a lot.
Yep.
A Doombull who runs around by himself is a infantry model and he has 5 wounds and like 6 attacks and he is a lone character and just can skirmish. So we're gonna have to get into those rules separately. But look, if you're not a lone character,
a loner with a lone character.
Oh yeah, that's nice.
2 different rules. Back to our criticism of they should have separated the terminology a little bit better. A lone character is specific character rules, not for champions, for characters that Evan's talking about, which is different than a model that has the special rule loner. 2 different things.
Right, and since you have to buy the mount at the list building stage, you don't like partway through the battle, I'm going to climb on a chariot and then like now I'm going to lead the battle from the front. And
You could in older
and,
editions.
you know,
Yeah,
and
in this
also you
edition.
used to be able to get killed. The mount was able to get killed out from under you, and then you revert back
Yep.
to being running around. So now you, as soon as you
Yep.
bought your character and you put them on a certain mount, so you have that model in front of
You're
you,
committed.
you're either a lone character or you're not. So we're gonna in the next video we'll talk about what do lone characters do, what is skirmish, like how does all that work, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Okay.
Sounds good. Anyway, this is how you build a character. That's basically what we've been covering so far. What characters are, what their stats look like, and look, in the vast majority of cases, you probably take mounts because in a lot of cases the mounts do a lot for you. So that's why we're covering that a lot because I think that maybe 2/3 of characters out there are like I'm mounted on something, right?
The dwarves disagree, but that's a different
They're
conversation.
mounted on other dwarves. What are you talking about?
Well, they're mounted on shields sometimes, but
It's that
yeah.
little babushka Russian doll situation where there's like dolls inside of dolls.
Oh God, I love dwarves. So cool. All right, what do we got next, sir?
Okay, well, we're going to wrap this one up, and then we're going to talk our next video. We're going to talk about lone characters because we've been going for a while here. So, just everyone out there, I want you to all to stay legendary. And hey, if you like the video, you like the tutorials, you can always subscribe and like the video and join us in our Discord. There's a link in the description where you can ask me endless questions. And because of my ridiculous ADHD, I will jump on Discord and immediately answer you. So,
All right, we'll see you all next time.